There's a moment everyone remembers, even if they never talk about it out loud. It's that quiet, uncomfortable pause after you've said something you truly meant, and the other person just stares back with confusion. You replay your words in your mind, wondering how something that felt so clear inside you came out sounding tangled, messy, or weaker than you intended. Maybe it happened in a conversation with someone you care about. Maybe it was at work. Maybe it was during a moment when your voice should have carried confidence, but instead it trembled, rushed, or disappeared under the weight of pressure. And in that tiny instant, you felt invisible, unheard, or misunderstood, like your voice didn't match the strength of your mind or the depth of your heart. What most people never realize is that unclear communication isn't just about struggling with words. It's about struggling with emotions, the fear of being judged, the fear of not being enough, the fear of saying something wrong and watching everything fall apart. People don't stumble because they're not smart or articulate. They stumble because clarity requires courage, and courage requires honesty. You can only speak clearly when you feel safe enough to reveal what you really mean. This book isn't about teaching you to sound perfect. It's about teaching you to sound real. It's about finding the voice that already lives inside you, the one that's calm when you're anxious, steady when you're overwhelmed, and meaningful when you're tempted to rush through sentences just to avoid the awkwardness of silence. Clarity starts with understanding yourself, your emotions, and the hidden tension that lives between your thoughts and your tongue. As you move through these chapters, you'll learn why your voice tightens when you feel pressure, why your mind races faster than your mouth can keep up, why conversations leave you drained instead of empowered, and why people sometimes miss your meaning even when you're trying your best. More importantly, you'll learn how to change that, how to speak in a way that feels grounded, intentional, and unmistakably you. By the end, you won't just speak more clearly, you'll speak with a kind of presence that makes people pause, lean in, and truly listen. Because your voice isn't just sound, it's your story, your identity, your power, and it's time the world hears it. Chapter 1. The moment you realize you're not being heard. There's a certain kind of silence that hurts more than arguments, more than criticism, more than being told you're wrong. It's the silence that follows a moment when you've tried to express something important, but the person across from you doesn't react the way you hoped. Maybe they nod without really listening. Maybe they look confused. Maybe they interrupt halfway through. Or maybe they change the subject entirely, leaving you stuck with that sinking feeling that your voice didn't land anywhere, like your words evaporated before they even reached the other person. And in that quiet space, something inside you whispers a painful question. Why didn't my message get through? You replay the conversation in your head, wondering if your tone was off, if you rambled, if you hesitated, or if you sounded unsure. You wonder why someone else could say the same thing and instantly command attention, while your message floats in the background like faint static. Most people think this feeling is harmless, just another moment in an ordinary day, but it leaves a mark. It makes you shrink back a little. It makes you talk faster, or softer, or less at all. It makes you doubt your own clarity, your own presence, your own ability to hold space when it matters. And when this happens enough times, you start to edit yourself before you even speak, removing pieces of your thoughts, trimming your emotions, hiding your deeper meaning, just to avoid feeling misunderstood again. The tragedy is that you begin to lose not just your words, but your confidence, your spark, your willingness to speak with heart. The truth is, most people were never taught how to be heard. They were taught grammar, vocabulary, presentation templates, professional tones, proper communication, but not emotional clarity. Not the courage to slow down, not the skill of matching intention to expression, not the calm self-belief that allows your voice to enter a room before your doubt does. Being heard isn't about having the loudest voice or the perfect sentence. It's about speaking with a grounded honesty that reaches people, not because it's flawless, but because it's felt. And once you understand this, something shifts inside you. You realize you don't need to perform communication. You just need to learn how to align your inner clarity with your outer expression. This chapter is the beginning of that shift. It's the moment when you choose to stop accepting invisibility and start reclaiming your voice. Not by forcing volume, not by memorizing scripts, but by understanding what's been blocking you from being heard in the first place. Because once you see the problem with fresh eyes, you can begin to rebuild your voice from the inside out. And that's where real clarity begins. Chapter 2. Why Clarity Isn't About Words. There's a common belief that the secret to clear communication is simply choosing the right words. But anyone who has ever tried to explain something deeply personal knows that clarity is not a vocabulary contest. You can use the perfect sentence structure, correct grammar, and even a polished tone, yet still feel the message slipping through your fingers like water. That's because clarity doesn't start with language. It starts with emotional alignment, knowing what you feel, why you feel it, and what part of that feeling needs to be shared. When your emotions are tangled, your words follow. When your mind is rushing, your sentences stumble. When you're scared of being misunderstood, you begin over-explaining, repeating yourself, or speaking in circles. The problem was never the words. It was the tension inside you. Most people don't realize how much emotion hits their voice before a single word is spoken. A tight throat, a shallow breath, a rushed pace, a nervous laugh. These signals speak louder than grammar ever will. When your internal world is chaotic, your voice becomes chaotic too. Even if you say exactly what you mean, your energy creates static around your message. People don't just hear what you say, they feel the intention behind it. If the intention is cloudy, the words become cloudy. But when your intention is clear, when you know exactly what truth you're trying to express, your voice naturally becomes steady, even if you're not using fancy language. Think about the moments when you've listened to someone speak with incredible clarity. It wasn't the complexity of their vocabulary that moved you. It was the simplicity of their honesty, the steadiness of their presence, the calm conviction in their voice. You felt what they meant, not just what they said. That is the real essence of speaking clearly, transparency of emotion, not perfection of language. And the moment you understand this, communication stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like connection. You no longer chase the right words, you chase the right intention. This chapter invites you to slow down and explore this deeper truth. Clarity isn't something you memorize. It's something you cultivate. It comes from settling your emotions before you speak, from giving your thoughts room to breathe, from respecting the message you're trying to share. When you treat communication as a transfer of energy instead of a transfer of words, everything changes. People listen differently, they respond differently, and most importantly, you feel different, more honest, more grounded, more confident in the way you share your inner world with the outer one. Chapter 3. Your voice, your story, your power. There's something quietly life-changing about realizing that your voice is more than a sound. It's an emotional signature. Every time you speak, you're not just sharing information. You're revealing pieces of your internal world, your wounds, your hope, your insecurities, your courage. Most people never think of it this way, so they treat their voice like a tool instead of a living expression of who they are. But the truth is, your voice carries the echoes of every experience that shaped you, the times you were ignored, the times you were celebrated, the moments you felt small, the moments you felt unstoppable. All of that hides itself in your tone, your pace, your rhythm, your breath. And because of that, speaking clearly is never just about communication. It's about understanding your identity. When people struggle to speak with confidence, it's rarely because they lack intelligence or ability. It's because somewhere along the way, they learn to shrink their voice to stay safe. Maybe someone told them they were too much. Maybe someone mocked the way they spoke when they were young. Maybe they felt dismissed one too many times, until speaking became less about expression and more about survival. So their voice softened, their sentences shortened, their presence faded. They tried to avoid judgment by avoiding fullness. What they didn't realize was that every time they held back a thought, they were also holding back a part of themselves. But there comes a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when you notice the gap between who you are inside and how you sound on the outside. And that moment can feel both heartbreaking and empowering. Heartbreaking because you realize how long you've been hiding. Empowering because you finally see what needs to change. Your voice can't grow stronger if your story stays buried. And your story won't be understood if you express it through a filtered, diluted version of yourself. Speaking clearly begins with honoring the truth that your life experiences have shaped a voice that deserves to be heard without apology. As you reconnect with your own story, the struggles, the triumphs, the broken pieces you survived, something inside you awakens. You start to speak from a place of grounded honesty instead of nervous performance. You stop rushing to fill silence because you're no longer scared of it. You stop over-explaining because you trust the value of your thoughts. You stop shrinking your voice because you're done shrinking your identity. And little by little, your voice becomes not just a sound, but a reflection of your strength. That's when communication stops being a task and becomes a form of self-ownership. When your voice aligns with your truth, people feel it instantly, and they listen not because you demand attention, but because your authenticity naturally commands it. Chapter 4. The fear behind every sentence. If people could look beneath the surface of everyday conversations, they'd see something surprising. Most communication isn't driven by what someone wants to say. It's driven by what they're afraid of saying wrong. Fear is the quiet puppeteer behind rushed sentences, shaky tones, overcomplicated explanations, and the habit of talking too much or too fast. It's the fear of being judged, the fear of looking unprepared, the fear of sounding foolish, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of disappointing someone, and underneath all of that, the deepest one, the fear that your voice won't matter. When fear sits behind your words, your clarity collapses, not because you're incapable, but because your nervous system goes into protection mode. This is why even the smartest people can sound unsure when emotions get involved. Fear doesn't care about intelligence. It cares about survival. And your brain treats social rejection the same way it treats physical danger. When your mind senses the possibility of being judged or dismissed, it floods you with urgency. Your heart races, your breath shortens, your sentences speed up, your thoughts scatter, you feel pressure to get it right, but that pressure only makes your message blurrier. Fear hijacks your clarity because it pushes you to speak quickly instead of thoughtfully, loudly instead of intentionally, anxiously instead of authentically. What most people never learn is that clarity requires safety, not from the outside world, but from within yourself. When you don't feel grounded, your voice can't be grounded. When you're scared of how people might react, you start shaping your message to please them instead of expressing what you genuinely feel. This is why so many conversations leave you drained. You're not sharing your truth. You're fighting your fear. And fear drains you faster than any conversation ever could. But here's the shift that changes everything. Fear loses its grip when you stop trying to outrun it and start trying to understand it. Fear shows up when something matters to you. It appears because your voice holds weight. It enters the sentence because the moment carries emotional meaning. When you accept this, fear becomes less of an enemy and more of a signal that you care, a signal that you're growing, a signal that you're stepping into a version of yourself who is no longer willing to stay silent or small. Speaking clearly isn't about eliminating fear. It's about learning to speak through it with steady breath, honest intention, and emotional presence. When you stop treating fear as a threat and start treating it as a companion, your voice becomes calmer, deeper, more grounded. People notice the shift. You notice the shift. Fear stops controlling your sentences, and your sentences begin reflecting your truth. That's the moment your communication starts transforming, not because the fear is gone, but because you no longer let it hold the microphone. Chapter 5. The Art of Pausing and Breathing. One of the quietest reasons people struggle to speak clearly is the fear of slowing down. Pauses feel dangerous. Silence feels like a spotlight. Breathing feels like admitting you're unsure. So instead, you rush. You push every sentence out like you're racing a clock, hoping speed will hide insecurity, hoping momentum will cover nervousness. But the faster you speak, the more your thoughts outrun your words, and the more your message loses its shape. What many people never realize is that clarity is born in space, not speed. The pause is not your enemy. The pause is your anchor. Think about how your body reacts when you're anxious. Your breath grows shallow. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts scatter like birds startled into the sky. In that state, your voice tries to keep up with your nervous system, and the result is a sentence that sounds like it's sprinting. The irony is that the more you rush, the more misunderstandings happen, and the more pressure you feel to correct them. That pressure builds panic. Panic speeds you up, and suddenly you're trapped in a loop where your voice is moving too fast for your mind to guide it. You're speaking, but you're not in control. The fear is. But something powerful happens when you give yourself permission to pause. When you inhale slowly, your body signals safety. When you leave space between thoughts, your mind organizes what truly matters. When you speak with intentional breaks, your voice gains weight and presence. People lean in. They absorb your meaning. They sense confidence even if you were trembling moments earlier. Breathing doesn't just help your voice, it helps your identity step forward. The pause lets you re-enter your own mind instead of being pulled around by panic. There's a quiet truth about communication that most people overlook. Silence is part of your voice, too. The moments when you take a breath, gather your thoughts, or allow a sentence to land are the moments that give your message shape, emotion, and meaning. The greatest speakers aren't loud. They're spacious. They don't fear pauses. They use them like punctuation for the soul. When you learn to breathe before you speak, you discover a version of yourself that isn't rushed, overwhelmed, or losing control. You become clear, steady, human. And suddenly, your listeners don't just hear your words. They feel them. Chapter 6. Breaking the Habit of Overtalking. There's a moment almost everyone has lived through. You're explaining something simple, but the longer you talk, the less sense it seems to make. You hear yourself rambling, circling the same point, adding extra details you didn't need, trying to fill every empty second because silence feels like judgment. And even though you know you've gone way past what's necessary, you can't stop. Overtalking becomes a shield, a way to protect yourself from the fear that your first attempt wasn't good enough. But every time you start talking in loops, you lose the impact you were trying so hard to create. Overtalking isn't a communication issue. It's a survival instinct. It's what your mind does when it feels unsafe. When you fear being misunderstood, you add more words. When you fear not being taken seriously, you over-explain. When you fear disappointing someone, you soften your message until it loses its heart. It's not that you don't know how to communicate. It's that you don't trust your voice enough to let a simple sentence stand on its own. And this habit slowly trains your mind to believe that your first thought is never enough, creating a loop where your clarity constantly competes with your fear. But the truth is, the strongest communicators say less, not more. They trust their message enough to let it breathe. They trust silence enough to use it. They trust themselves enough to speak once instead of 5 times. You don't break the habit of over-talking by forcing yourself to be brief. You break it by learning to feel safe inside your own words. When you trust that your voice matters, you stop trying to earn your listeners' understanding with extra sentences. You begin to speak with calm certainty. You choose simplicity instead of urgency. You let your meaning stand instead of burying it under layers of explanation. And when that shift happens, something powerful changes in your presence. People hear you differently. They feel the confidence behind your choices. They sense the strength in your pauses. Overtalking disappears not because you hold back, but because you finally believe that your voice is already enough, and you don't need to prove it with every breath. Chapter 7. How to Speak So People Actually Listen. There's a kind of speaker people naturally lean toward, not because of volume, not because of authority, but because every word carries intention. When they speak, the room slows down. Conversations feel meaningful. Their thoughts feel guided instead of scattered, honest instead of guarded. People listen because the speaker's presence creates clarity before the words even arrive. This isn't a talent some are born with. It's a choice, a practice, a mindset. The ability to speak so people listen begins long before a sentence is spoken. The first part of being heard is attention. Your own. Most people speak to be understood, but they rarely listen to what's happening inside themselves as they talk. They ignore the pace of their breath, the pressure building in their chest, the discomfort that makes them rush through moments that deserve patience. When you speak without grounding yourself, your voice becomes reactive. You sound like you're chasing the conversation instead of leading it. But when you breathe, slow down, and speak from intention instead of impulse, your presence sharpens. People don't just hear you, they feel your clarity. Another part of being listened to is emotional honesty. You don't have to overshare. You don't have to be dramatic. But people connect with truth, not performance. When your tone matches your intention, when you speak from the place inside you that's real rather than rehearsed, listeners pick up on it instantly. Human beings are wired to respond to authenticity. You can say something simple with genuine emotion, and it will land stronger than a perfect speech delivered with a disconnected heart. And then there's pacing, the rhythm that gives meaning room to settle. Most people rush through important moments because they fear vulnerability. But the pause right before the key sentence, the breath before the personal truth, the softness after a powerful statement, these are the moments that anchor listening. They make your words feel alive. They make your message stay with people long after the conversation ends. Speaking in a way that invites listening doesn't come from sounding perfect. It comes from carrying presence, intention, and emotional truth into your voice. When you speak from that place, people don't just hear you, they remember you. Chapter 8. Speak 10 times clearer. There comes a point in every personal transformation where all the scattered lessons, quiet realizations, painful fears, and small victories finally merge into something solid, a new way of being. Speaking clearly isn't just about communicating better. It's about stepping into a version of yourself that no longer hides behind rushed words or silent hesitation. It's about carrying a voice that feels honest, confident, intentional, and emotionally aligned with who you're becoming. When you reach this moment, you're not trying to sound clear anymore. You are clear, inside and out. To speak 10 times clearer means speaking from a place where your thoughts are steady, your breath is calm, and your message rises from a grounded center instead of a scattered or fearful one. It means letting silence support your words instead of rushing to fill it. It means releasing the old belief that you must earn space in a conversation. You learn to trust your voice enough to let it stand on its own. You stop hiding behind over-explaining because you finally believe that what you say carries value even before anyone responds. Clarity also means honoring your emotional truth. You don't pretend you're fine when your voice is trembling with frustration. You don't sound detached when your heart is full. You don't shrink your message just because you worry someone might not like it. You speak with transparency, not brutal honesty that harms, but compassionate honesty that connects. People respond not because your words are perfect, but because your presence is undeniable. When you speak 10 times clearer, you communicate from a place of deep alignment. You choose intention over impulse, presence over performance, authenticity over perfection. You understand that your voice is not just a tool, it's your story, your identity, your power. You become someone who speaks in a way that others remember, someone whose voice carries calm strength, someone who leads conversations instead of getting lost inside them. And the beautiful part is, you didn't learn to speak more clearly by changing who you are. You learned it by returning to who you were always meant to be, someone whose voice matters, someone whose truth deserves to be heard, someone capable of shaping the world with words that finally reflect the heart behind them. Conclusion. If you've made it to this point, then something inside you has already shifted. You're no longer the person who speaks just to fill silence or to avoid being misunderstood. You've crossed into a new chapter of your life, one where your voice feels like a living part of you instead of something you're constantly trying to fix or hide. You've learned that clarity isn't a technique. It's a mindset, a presence, a relationship with yourself that grows every time you breathe with intention and speak with honesty. Speaking clearly is really about speaking bravely. It's the courage to slow down when you feel pressure, the courage to express emotion without apologizing for it, the courage to trust your message even when the room feels intimidating. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to stand a little taller inside yourself. You're not trying to impress anyone anymore. You're simply letting your truth travel through your voice with fewer barriers, fewer fears, and fewer doubts. And as you continue using these tools, something remarkable will happen. People will start listening differently. They'll feel your calm. They'll sense your intention. They'll respond to your presence. But more importantly, you will feel different. You'll stop replaying conversations in your head. You'll stop shrinking your ideas. You'll stop doubting whether your voice belongs in the room, because it does, and it always did. So let this be your reminder. Your voice is not small, your message is not weak, and your truth is not optional. Speak with clarity. Speak with heart. Speak with presence, because someone out there needs the strength only your voice can give. If you're ready to keep growing, keep rising, and keep strengthening your inner world, stay with this journey. Check out the next video and keep shaping the voice that will carry you through the life you're building. Your next chapter starts now.